All right, I'm going to get flying then. In case you didn't know, NSTA does no longer support SPA review through the AIM system. So it's been a while since you uh, submitted, then it will be a state review this time. But don't worry, it's not that much different. And for those of you who are new, just feel lucky that you're going to learn the state review right from the very beginning. So it's going to seem very natural. But if you inherited anything from a previous review, at least know that it's not drastically different. And I do know that I've got a couple CAPE coordinators on the line, and I'm just going to remind everybody that state review in our current agreement with CAPE works just fine in standard, revised standard 1 for the initial preparation. So there's no problem there. And so, again, I put in the chat, and I will again at the end, the link to the slides. And so you'll be able to have these links when you go through that. But I just want to point out that we do use the NCTM or NSTA. You're going to hear me say that because I just came out of my NCTM session. We do use the NSTA national standards for review. We are on the 2020 standards right now. They NSTA, one of the things I like about NSTA is they have those content analysis forms that you can use for standard 2 and or assessment 2, and we'll talk about this in a moment. But I just thought it would be helpful if you had the links to all of those all in one place. Cassie, do you want to say anything? Okay. And then just a big picture overview of the assessments that you need to have. We'll come back to this later in the presentation, but just keep in mind that in the state of South Carolina, assessment 1 is the praxis subject assessment. Some people call it praxis 2 from back in the day, but it's the praxis subject assessment for your particular science area. You can do combined reports for science if your assessments are generally the same. And the only thing is, for example, on assessment 1, you'd want to break out the praxis tests by the different subject areas. So, for example, when Cassie did hers, we have biology and chemistry. And so we had tables for biology and we had tables for chemistry, but we didn't write separate reports when we submitted to the state. And that helps the state reviewers when you do that because it's less work for them. And I think it's less work for the writer as well to do combined. So assessment 1 is the praxis subject assessment. Assessment 2, man, use grades or transcript review on that one. I think it's pretty super helpful in NSTA. They seem to really like that. And you have to do those content forms that were on that previous slide anyway, so you might as well use it as an assessment, just my little 2 cents worth. Assessment 3 is a unit plan or some kind of lesson planning. I would be specific about whether the unit plan or lesson planning is actually implemented. So maybe they do it in a field experience scenario and you actually ask them to teach it. It's real important that you tell the reviewers that, because the assumption will be that they don't implement it in assessment 3. Assessment 4 is student teaching internship evaluations. And I just want to warn you that if you're one of the vast majority of institutions in the state that use that SCTS 4.0 rubric, which is based on the NIET rubric, it's not science specific. And so, yes, there's some components that you can align, but it doesn't align perfectly with the NCTM or NSTA. Wow, the NSTA standards. And so you may want to think about an addendum that is more science specific. Assessment 5 is almost always some sort of project, or it has to be some sort of project where students, the candidates, are collecting student data, thinking about that student data, and showing how that student data is impacting both planning as well as instruction. So teacher work samples do that very nicely. Just be careful about language and making sure it hits the science standards. Or an assessment project where they collect pre and post data and they talk about that. Or it could be a TPA or PPAT if your institution uses one of those assessments. And then standard assessment 6, focus on standard 6. It's a professionalism standard. It's hard to hit in the other assessments. So really encourage you to focus on standard 6. Cassie, do you want to talk about what you did for standard 6? You are muted.
There's a humming in my office from outside, so I just don't want it to. There actually was a question before we move on about the assessment 5 about state SLO. Would that work for assessment 5?
Yeah, I'm not tremendously familiar with that, but the students do have to, the candidates have to collect pre and post data. I think what I would warn you about is the rubric itself, and really look at it and make sure that it addresses the science specific expectations that are in STA. And if it doesn't, then consider creating an addendum to the standard rubric.
That would make good sense. And I wanted to clarify with you, Beth, did you mean to share this or just want people to look off the Google link?
I meant to share it. Is it not sharing?
I'm not seeing it, but maybe I'm not on Teams a lot. Has anybody seen the slideshow?
Okay. No, I'm not sharing it. I can see that now. I apologize. Whoops.
So that's what she just went over. And 6 is professional development. And so what we have done, and link needed permission to see, Brooke says. So
okay, I'll fix that while Cassie's talking.
So now this is what she does. This is basically all you've gone through, right? For the most part, as far as the slides. So so that was a lot, but it was supposed to be right in front of you. And when I've tackled this, I was always like trying to keep in mind what are my assessments and then how they align to my different standards. And of course, sometimes they match perfectly, like assessment 1 goes with the standard 1, but then there are places where different indicators will be utilized in different places and so forth. For standard 6, it has been that I have worked with my students to do professional development and basically log what they do and then reflect on how they'll use it in their future. And luckily, we've been able to take students to things like NSTA conferences, so that's helpful. When that's not an opportunity, or during COVID years, it was a little more difficult, but trying to get that ramp back up. And so it's not something they do just at once. They kind of over the last 2 years of the program, they work on it and then they submit it in their last semester. So that's how I've utilized assessment 6. Now, I do think indicator A asks them also just self-reflection in general as a teacher, and I've gone back to our internship evaluation for that to build on that also. So.
All right, so we're going to go through each standard. I did cut the components in so you can see those, and then talk to you about where you're going to get those assessments. Cassie, I'm still repeating when your mic is on. Can you mute? It's very distracting. I'm sorry. Thank you. So here are the 3 components. Standard 1 is all about content knowledge within science, and specifically the science area that you're talking about. Components 1A and 1B are typically covered on assessments 1 and 2, and remember grades are really helpful for assessment 2. And because those two are about the candidate's ability or the candidate's knowledge in science. But then when you look at 1C, it's about demonstrating knowledge about the implementing the science standards. So that has to be in a place where they're at least lesson planning. And so assessment 3 or honestly assessment 4, but assessment 3 is the one that NSTA recommends. Because it really is about planning, learning progressions, and sequencing of those science standards for the K-12 learner. So you're actually probably going to tag 3 different assessments to standard 1. Cassie, just tell me if you need to say something. Okay, and then standard 2 is the content pedagogy. So it's very science focused, but it's more about the pedagogy of teaching the science. So that, again, there are 5 components, and I will tell you at the state level review, it is okay if you don't have all 5. That may not have been true when NSTA was reviewing them. But if your alignment's not great, for example, to 2C, and you don't get 2C, but you get the rest of them, you're probably going to have the preponderance of evidence, and you're probably going to be okay at the state level. It's always good to have all of them, but there is a little flexibility with that at the state level. And typically, the assessment 3, which is something about lesson planning or unit plan or something like that, and assessment 4, the internship student teaching evaluation, are good ones to hit, and those are the ones that are recommended for tagging for standard 2. But I just really keep saying, really pay attention to the science language that is in here. I mean, because for example, 2E talks about integrating science specific technologies, not just technologies in general. And so sometimes our internship student teaching evaluations talk about technology, but that could be any kind of technology like presentation technology or things like that. And this is specifically about science. Cassie, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think this one is very science specific, wording heavy, and you do have to watch out for that, and maybe just make sure you're using those words in your rubrics. You may have already been measuring it, but just isn't in those words. So look at it that way. And also, I'll say, like when I wrote this report last summer, I did realize I was lacking in 2C. So I now, and I have this as part of their unit plan. And so that also worked, right? Like to say, okay, I don't have any data on 2C right now, but I've already redesigned this assessment, and from now on I will. So that seemed to work also.
And since we're talking about assessment 2, and we've talked a little bit about those content matchups, I just took a little screenshot of one of the content sheets that was linked to an earlier slide that you all could not see. And I'm so sorry about that. But you will in the PDF. If you use assignment 2 and assessment 2 is grades or transcript analysis, what you have to do is, for each of the subject areas, biology, chemistry, whatever it is that you have programs in, you have to go in and complete this document that has, questions. This is not everything under Life Science 1.A, but they'll give you a question, and then you have to come over and say, here's the course that covers what is a cell, how do cells function similarly and differently in unicellular and multicellular organisms. So I have no idea what that means. But if you are in the life sciences, you know what that means. So I'm going to let Cassie talk a little bit more about this.
So this has changed from a previous version, and it is a little different perspective of a way to align things that your faculty may not be as familiar with. And so I do agree it's good to get their feedback. early in this report writing, in case you have to make a curriculum change or course recommendations for your candidates. The other thing that I've found helped to get responses quickly was to fill it out to the best of my ability and then send it to them and say, please take a look at this and let me know your thoughts. Do I have this, and then they would help me tweak and figure out where things went and if I had the right courses aligned to their requirements. So I would that's a suggestion that I think will get you quicker responses instead of just saying, can you fill this out for me? And you do have to do your supporting. So even if you only have a biology program, then there's a chemistry and physics and geology section. So you still might need to work with those. Those are supporting competencies. You still might need to work with faculty from those departments also. I think there's something. So I think, Catherine, your question on that is every question, yes, every question, every box, you have to put a course, but there is going to be a lot of repetition. You're going to use the same course quite often, especially your intro level. Like we have 2 freshman level biology courses, and they kind of feed in at almost every point. And they should be classes that everyone in your program takes, or it's going to get real tricky and complicated. And there can be some ors, and like they took this or this, and they'll be okay with it. But yeah, you have to do each of the questions the way it's written out, the way that I understood it, and the way I've always used those forms in the past. But I did see William, who has been involved in this, ask that question. But yeah, that's the way I interpreted it, to fill in every blank. And let me know if I'm answering that question correctly. Yeah, there's a lot of repeats. It's very much repeated when you do it.
Any other questions before we move on to standard 3? All right, I'm not going to give a lot of wait time because we only have an hour, but we can always go back. So here is standard 3. You can see that there are 3 components here. NSTA suggests that is going to be in your assessment 3, in your assessment 4, and that makes sense because this is the learning environment and what is happening around the learning. But the language here has to do with planning. So make sure that you note that. And again, you're going to see this over and over from me. And I know it's my bias from my work with NCTM is really pay attention to that science specific language, because a lot of common rubrics do not have enough detail to get some of these. All right. Then a few warnings, I just said it. And what I mean by an addendum is, you've got this common rubric for your internship or your student teaching experience. And then at the end, you have a few additional rubric lines that really only science students are evaluated on, that has very specific science expectations for the students. And the other thing, I can't imagine that you wouldn't be allowed to use that. The EPP may not want that data, so you may have to put that separately and not in the same document, but it is for your scenario so that you can do that. You can also really concentrate on assessments that the science educator has control over. When you're trying to come up with things for standard 3. And then we have been pretty successful in some of our rubrics that are common because they're not external rubrics. You have to be really careful with the SCTS rubric in this regard, but we don't use that rubric for internship. So we have been pretty successful at adding some notes. So here's the general EPP wide description on what it means to do something. And then we've added notes. In a science classroom, this should be interpreted as including these components that are more science specific. And then the other thing, some of the science standards from NSTA are really, there's a lot in them. So you got to really make sure that you're covering the whole thing, because I mean, just in standard 3, if you're looking at just 3A, there is a lot there in one standard. So just be real, or one component. So be careful with the breadth. And then standard 4 is safety. And this is a very, very, of all, I always get confused when I'm looking at the science standards because of the safety standard, because standard 4 is typically not this kind of standard in other areas, but there is a relation, because it's really about teaching in the classroom and teaching in the classroom in a way that is safe for those students. So I don't see how you could get this from a standard EPP rubric, or the SC version of the NIET rubric that is used in internships. So you're probably going to need an addendum. NSTA suggests that it's part of assessment 4. Cassie, do you want to say anything about the safety one?
Just, yeah, it's an addendum to our internship evaluation, just as she said, and it it's pretty straightforward. We obviously build up to this in the methods classes, and talk about it a lot, and I even have them do the Flynn scientific training online, safety. So I'd say that's what's recommended by the state. If you go to the state webpage, that's their recommendation, and put it on your resume and all that. So there's build up to this, but in all my report writing, just having this as the assessment seems to always be adequate.
All right, I'm going to pause here before we go on to standards 5 and 6 in case there are any questions. David, you can just turn on your mic and ask.
Yeah, I had a question. So we have a chemistry program, and in looking at the safety, there's safety relevant to living organisms. My students don't have living organisms. Do I just not speak to that standard because it's not applicable? Chemicals don't die.
What I have done, because I work with chemistry program also, is just still have it on there, and then there's a not applicable scenario. Now that's because I also have biology students. If you're strictly chemistry,
at this point, yes.
You could, I would guess, and Beth could probably answer this even better, that you could just talk about that in your report, and then that's why you don't measure it.
I would at least mention it just to make it obvious to the reviewer, but you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Acknowledge that it is a thing, and then acknowledge that it is irrelevant to us.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Okay, we have a couple questions in the chat also. And some reiterations. Definitely pay attention to the content specific terminology. I think 2 and 3 standard, both of those are huge. Let's see. Assessments 3 through 6. Pay attention to addendums or your own. It should not be general type thing assessments. So question about NSTA, these are NSTA standards, but they are not reviewing the program. So it is being reviewed at the state, but they are using the NSTA standards as criteria to review our reports. So you still need all of those. Those are what show up on the report form that you align your assessments to. So it's basically the same as if you've ever written an NSTA report. It's just going to different people to read it, if that makes sense. Because at first I was like, oh, it's not, NSTA is not requiring this anymore. This is going to be, it's not a big deal, but it's really still the same thing. It's just different reviewers. Safety module. I've done a safety module on student teaching safety rubric. Is the module still needed? So I don't think it's needed for the report. I think it's probably an important thing that you should still get across to them somehow, so they'll be successful during the internship evaluation, and that they are safe with their students. But like, as far as writing the report, I've maybe mentioned the things I've done to lead up to it in my report, but never used any of the data. I've never, on all 3 iterations of my report writing, and I got this right from an NSTA conference similar to this, where I was talking to one of the reviewers at the time. So they seem to like simplicity with NSTA, and I'm assuming the state appreciates that also. So hopefully I answered that question from Christine.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just gonna say my comment is also about the ethical use of animals, because that lesson plan seems to be, my students think it's a waste of time because they don't see a lot of that in secondary. I have a lot of chemistry also, but yeah, I still, of course, hit on safety. The Flynn course is awesome. Just if I can tweak that, I want to do it now while I have time before we start collecting data again. Yeah.
And I think having that safety course is a good thing, as Cassie said, but I would talk about that in the interpretation of data, because you could say my students do very well on this section on safety, and that can be contributed at least in part to the fact that in this course they go through this training.
And I think Catherine had a similar question about that there was a safety portfolio before. Did that answer, Catherine, the things we've said and what Beth just said? Did that answer that for you? I think, again, I think you need to have some evidence of them doing this in student teaching is the big thing they're looking for. And you can talk about other things in your analysis and things like that. And I think William, who again has a lot of experience in this, is suggesting, I think this was back to the chemistry question, if it's still the preponderance of evidence, you definitely want to talk about that living organisms, acknowledge it in the report, that you recognize that it's part of the standard. I think that was what was.
I would like to add one other thing is, and this goes to what Beth was saying, is that if you look at the verbs that we use to develop standard 4, it's implement, demonstrate, demonstrate. So it's not just having the knowledge of Flynn, it's being able to implement it. So hopefully there's some type of rubric or an observation instrument, which is an addendum to the SCTS, that you can actually see the person implementing it in a lesson plan or as a behavior in the classroom.
Yes, thank you. And that is why I think it's always stressed to me that all they really wanted for this assessment was something related to the internship evaluation. So thank you for confirming that.
Anything else, Cassie?
I think in the chat we're good. Anybody else? I was always very happy that it was that simple as far as the data reporting. You know, you have to do your due diligence and get them ready to be safe in the internship, of course, but you don't necessarily have to document it and supply data and all that. They really just want to see that they are doing the right thing out there in the field.
All right. So standard five is impact on student learning. So this is where you're going to do, maybe a teacher work sample or a pre-post test or something like that. It does need to include formative and summative assessment evidence that is in the standards. So, really pay attention to those ands versus ors when you're looking at standards generally. And there is, if you look at the language, there is a little bit of analysis about the way NSTA says it is based upon student demographics, categorizing levels of learner knowledge. So it's not enough to just collect whole group data. You need to at least think about some of the subsets that may be relevant to the classroom where your student is included. And then there is also when you're talking about impact on student learning. So I've done this pre-test, I've taught a lesson or two, I've done a post-test, I've analyzed my data, and I've talked about whether my students learned or whether they didn't learn, and how is it differentiated in certain subgroups. But then there's also this look to, okay, so now you have all this data, what are you going to do with it? right? So how is this going to impact what you're planning for the future and what you're teaching in the future? So it really is bigger than just collecting data and talking about the data. So be careful with that. And then, and not all EPP wide teacher work samples do that. That you may even have, not only sometimes do you have to add an addendum to the rubric, sometimes you may have to add a separate part to the assignment itself so that you have the information that you need in order for the students to meet these particular guidelines. So you really, I really always stress that general EPP assessments are, you have to use them, but they can also be dangerous if you don't adapt them to make it work for you. And then a standard 6, it only has 3 components again, so that's kind of nice. This is that professional knowledge and skills. I do want to say, I asked Cassie to talk about assessment 6 that she does is that kind of professional development portfolio, and the students are working up to that over time. It's just she collects that information at a particular point and evaluates it with a rubric. There are a lot of free webinars out there. So if you don't have the ability to send your students to a conference, that's okay. You could, within some course, ask them to view some of the webinars that exist from NSTA and other science-specific sources. There may be professional learning communities within the school where your student is doing their student teaching that focus on science learning. That might be a way that your students could have experienced that meet this. And again, NSTA suggests using assessment 6, so I would encourage that, but there may be some way, and I think Cassie alluded to this, especially with 6A, you may have something that allows you to target 6A in either assessments 4 or 5 or 5. Cassie, do you want to say anything else about that?
Just that, I double dipped a little bit, not really, but, I allow them to, list their Flynn scientific training as one of their things that they have done that is, professional development. And yes, there's lots of things online. NSTA has lots of great webinars now. If you can take them places, that's great too. So the other thing I think is to differentiate between the two, and it's actually might open up more if you notice it, that it's also just their science content knowledge is big, right? So that could really open up a lot more opportunities perhaps on your campus and things like that. So take note of 6B and 6C and how they differ just slightly, but enough that could give them more opportunities.
All right, any questions? All right, I am going to move very quickly through the next set of slides because I just want you to see some screenshots from the templates that the state has. If you need templates, if you're coming up on the review and you just want to see what those look like in whole, you can reach out to Jackie Walsh at South Carolina Department of Ed, and she will email the templates to you. Your CAPE coordinator can help you make that contact if you're not that individual. But there's nothing there that's wasn't in Ames if you did the last report in Ames. It's a slightly different scenario because we don't use Ames anymore for science. And so they are Word docs, so they are not published on the web anywhere, because publishing web docs, if you're a state institution or entity, is difficult to do. So there is a cover document. There's a faculty qualifications document. You don't have to fill that out for the state. if you are regionally accredited, because your regional accreditor actually asks for that. You can if it helps you in some way, but you don't actually have to fill that out for the state. It's pretty straightforward. There is a place for you, you are expected to submit program of study, and if you have a graduate level initial prep program, what's your transcript review document look like? If you've got students coming in, if you have only a 4+1 and your students are all coming from your undergraduate program and there are specific courses they had to take, that's not a problem. But if you also accept students from the outside who maybe got their biology degree from another institution, you do need a transcript review document to show that what do you look for, what categories do you look for, to make sure they've met all the content standards. And then you will have individual assessment templates for each assessment, and there are 4 versions of those: 1 for praxis, 2 for grades, and I'll show you though. I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. But the reason there are 2 is because if all the courses are taken at your institution, you fill out 1. If you look at transcripts, you fill out the other. And then there's one, the 4th one is just a general one that you can use for everything else. So there are specific templates for assessment 1 and 2, and then the same template works for all the rest of them. So the cover has general demographics. There's some content questions. I'm not going to go through all this. This is stuff you've seen, or you can look back at later. That's not the purpose of this, to go into detail, but it is the questions that you have always answered in the context section in AIMS. The one difference is on the field and clinical experiences question, there's a place for a short narrative, and then you're asked to fill in this table. The templates have a lot of tables to try to cut down on the narrative that you're writing, to really target you to the information that the reviewers need. Also in the context, there's a place to describe any GPA requirements for your degree and what does it take to get admitted to teacher ed. There is an optional box, so if there's something that you need to describe that you haven't been able to so far, you can put it in there, but it is optional, which means it could be left blank. So if there's nothing else you need to describe, it is okay to leave it blank. And then there's going to be 3 years of program enrollment data and completer data. And there is a list of assessments. And I show that, I don't think I show you that in here, but it looks just like what it used to look like in AIMS. Here is where, this is a little different than AIMS. When you went into AIMS, your standards were pre-populated for you, and you could just click off which of the assessments that matched up. In the state templates, you actually have to insert, cut and paste the standard. And we encourage going to the component level for the match. It's not, I guess, not required, but we really encourage that. Cassie, do you want to say something about that?
Well, just thinking back to those indicators and that very specific language, you might find yourself, I did find myself spreading those out a little bit more than I had in the past when the standards were a little different. So I do think that because of that, I would recommend that also.
Going to the component level. Still on the cover document, which is a separate document, you will have a section. It used to be the old section 5 in AIMS, where you'll talk about the assessment results. There are 4 separate fields for that. One is an overview where you just talk about, here's how we look at data. Here's our process for continuous improvement. And then there's a box for you to talk about how you use data associated with content knowledge, professional and pedagogical knowledge, and then impact on student learning. This is hard for some of my people, not for Cassie. Cassie does a good job, but this is hard for some of my people to do because they've already talked about their data. So why am I having to talk about it here again? Just remember, this is overall. What are the big things that have happened in content knowledge? Did you add a course? Did you change a course? Did you add an assessment? Did you change an assessment? What do you know about the student's content knowledge based on overall, not just individually for each assessment, but overall, what did you learn about content knowledge over the past 7 years? Actually, can go all the way back to your last review. And if you're having to submit for revisions because you got conditions or something like that the first time, there is a place to outline what changes that you made. That used to be section 6. And then, so all of the assessment templates have a place for you to describe the assessment. I will repeat something that is on the screen. Brevity is encouraged. You're not writing everything there. You're going to give them the assessment, right? If it's not one that's like Praxis. So you don't have to write a novel about everything. But, you know, generally this is a unit plan. We do it in this, this area of the sequence. And this is what we're trying to do with that. It is planning only, or they plan it and they administer it in a classroom, and that kind of thing. But, you know, not a long, drawn out explanation, because you're going to give the assessment in a moment. Part 2 looks different on the different templates because of the way that you get information back. And part 2 is where you are aligning the assessment with the specific components. And so the general one, this is the one that's used for everything except Praxis and grades. It's where you're going to have these tables, and you can copy and make extra sections or delete tables if you need to. You're just basically saying, I'm aligning to 2.2a. It's this rubric item in my rubric, and here's why. And I'm using the language of the component to explain why these things match up. And you can do this as a narrative. You can delete the tables and use it as a narrative, but man, it helps the reviewers if it's not a narrative and you have to dig through the narrative. Cassie, do you want to say anything about that before I move on?
Yeah, I found this useful when I did have to like pull from, like, an assessment actually covered several indicators from several standards. It helped me get my head around it too, because I did run into that, especially with standards 2 and 3, trying to make those all be aligned. So I agree. The table's nice. Science, math people, we like tables, right?
And I will just say, if you're talking about standard 2 and it only aligns to 2 of the 3 components, you're only going to list the 2 components that align. So it's not, you don't have to list everything. Remember that these templates are set up for all programs, all standards. So when you see the template for grades, there is going to be tables that look like this in your template. You're not going to use them in science. You are going to delete those in science. And the reason why that is true is because you filled out those content review documents, and that is what you're going to insert as part 2. So it makes assessment 2 really long, doesn't it, Cassie? It is really, you're scrolling forever in assessment 2, but you've got everything matched up there. You're telling the person, here's where we're talking about this, and here's where we're talking about this, and that's going to be able to give you credit. Do you want to say anything more? Okay.
It's just, once you have this form done, then you've got that done too. So
yeah.
That's where.
So don't feel like you have to do what's in the standard template on that one, because you have already done it. And then Praxis looks a little bit different in part 2 because you just how Praxis is set up. So you're going to say it aligns with the standard in this element, and here's the subscore of the section that it aligns with. So it's just a little bit more straightforward. Then part 3, again, looks a little bit different on the different templates. Part 3 is where you provide candidate data. So data from something like Praxis looks very different than something like the grades data. So The general one, if it's a rubric that you're working with, so like your internship rubric or something like that, you're going to just list the rubric. And you don't have to use these data tables. If somebody at your institution creates data tables for you and you want to take these out and insert them in, that's fine. This is just for people who don't have that. You just list the rubric item, make sure you align it to the standard element in the data table, regardless of who gives you the data table. And then you're just going to say number and percentage at each level and the percentage that met expectations overall. This works really well for NSTA. There are some that also require you to have an average score. So if that's something that you really wanted in yours, it's fine to have average score. These are just example data tables.
We have a couple questions. So Praxis subscore, yes, we do need Praxis subscore data.
Yeah.
And then can we link and combine reports if we only have one completer for one of the two programs? That's what we have done. We did it. We had only MATs and we had chemistry and biology. So I'm not sure if that works if you have undergraduates also. Beth
Yes, it does.
Okay, so
It
yes,
does.
link and combine does.
You do have to disaggregate by group though, even if you only have one student in a group. So maybe you have an undergraduate that graduates in biology this year, but not the next. That's fine. Just put that in there. But then you have an MAT that only does it in this year. You just have to break it apart by program and subject area. So if you had undergrad biology, undergrad chemistry, grad chemistry, and grad biology, you'd have 4 tables, even if you only had 2 students. And the state will review even if you don't have completers, which happens sometimes in the sciences.
So from what they have, it sounds like you'll do a chem and a bio table for each of these assessments, but you will have 0 in one of them and you'll have 1 in the other. But that'll get you accreditation for both the programs, even if you put it through with 0 completers, if your report's accepted. So no, it can also, so linking is only for undergrad and grad in the same content area. You could do that also. For instance, my report had a table for biology undergrads. Did it? Well, I didn't have any. I can't remember, but we had 3 possibilities. We had biology undergrads, biology MAT, and chemistry MAT. We did not have chemistry undergrad.
But it was all in one report.
Yes. And
Okay, thanks. I was going to say, just to clarify, Beth, this is Judy back in that the overview one, the first thing this morning, when y'all talked about linked reports, the way it was said made it sound like if I had biology at the undergrad and MAT, I could link them. But again, y'all were only talking about, I think Beth, for instance, you were doing the math as an example. So that's why I just wanted clarification, because we used to have to do them separately.
Not for the state.
So the grade one is going to be twice as long, or if we're using grades, it's going to be twice as long as anything. Great. Thank you.
Right. But there's a lot of overlap between those tables, Judy. Like when you're doing the table for biology and you're doing the table for chemistry, there's a lot of overlap between those 2 tables and the courses that are used and things like that. So it is a lot. It's two sets of tables, but it's not like starting from scratch on each one of them.
So William put it in writing very well in the chat. Basically, you got to disaggregate the data, but if anybody wants to look at that, thank you, William.
And Judy, just for you, because I know you write more than just science, the other place where you see people do multiple disciplines within the same one is language. So like if you have French and Spanish, you can put those in the same report, as long as you disaggregate data and that the assessments are the same.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and then here's the view of the assessment template for grades. There are some specific tables that you have to use if you're doing grades. You do have to add the grade policy. That box is clearly not on anything except grades. And there are actually 2 tables. You have to complete both tables. There is a transcript review version of the grade ones, like I said before, but it looks very similar. The big difference is you have to describe how the transcript review works. You have to insert your transcript review. And then if you've had to remediate any students after the transcript review, you have to describe that. So it is just, it's a little bit different, but I think it's self-explanatory when you see the tables. Then here's what the tables look like for the praxis. We were talking earlier about the sub-scores. So there's actually 3 tables for each program or each discipline. You are going to repeat a table from the cover here to tell what was your overall enrollment and how many completers. You can just copy and paste that from the cover sheet. But you do have to give pass rate data. So there is 1 table on pass rate. There are only 2 lines because you only have to give 2 cycles of data. And then you do have to give sub-score data for praxis. And then all the because of the way the templates are set up, I was like, what does that mean? A couple of these data interpretations, actually section 5, because something's left out before, but the one I pulled it out of, it was data interpretation, which is section 4. Data interpretation does not have to be a novel. Again, just make sure you're really talking about what does the data tell you about your program and your candidates, both positive and areas for attention or growth. So that's a pretty common. And then after you do that section, with the exceptions of grades and praxis or any other assessments where you can't share rubrics, you have to attach what you gave to the student as well as the rubric that was used. And here's a chance just to emphasize, you really do need to have the alignment in your rubrics. You were asking good questions along, so I'm going to skip this question 1 and just give some final suggestions and be able to wrap it up because we have about 3 minutes. So, and I'll stay on after if there are any questions. So, try to avoid aligning more than 1 component in a single row in a rubric. I'm not saying you can never do that, okay, for the state, but you have to be really careful with doing that. And that is especially true in NSTA because these are dense components. So it's going to be really hard to get multiple components within 1 row. And then I already talked about link reports, talked ad nauseum about EPP-wide assessments. Make sure you're aligning to the component, not the standard. We see that sometimes. It really has to go to that component level. So that's automatically going to mean you're going to rewrite that assessment in a response to conditions or a revision. Watch the science-specific language. And I will tell you as a reviewer, the most painful programs to review are not programs that have some issues that need to work on some things, because we all need to work on things. They are programs that have aligned every standard to every rubric and they don't make any sense. And you're trying your best to dig through there and give the program the credit that you can give. And frankly, they're hurting themselves by doing that because you miss things, because there's so many different things aligned. So just really, really be strategic about how you align things. When I'm assigned one and I see that in rubrics, I cringe because I know how hard those are going to be, because I want to give credit where credit is due, but it is sometimes really, really hard. This is the assessment summary that we talked about before. The one thing we didn't talk about were assessment 7 and 8, which are optional. there's no unwritten rule that says that the state is expecting assessment 7 and 8. If you need them, use them. If you've set up some kind of way to check off all your components like that table on the cover, and you realize, wait a minute, I'm missing 3 things in standard 4. I got to do something. That's where you do an assessment 7 or an assessment 8. Generally, the expectation is that you will only have 6 assessments for NSTA. That's a little bit different for those of you who write multiples in some of the other SPAs, but NSTA does not expect more than 6. I mean, the state using NSTA. Here are Cassie and I's email addresses. I am going to put back in the chat the link to the
I can do it now, but
slides.
I did it.
I got it. Okay, I got it.
Well, it's there. We might both send it.
Yeah, we did. Whoops. Again, I see, William, you have your hand raised. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Hi, I just have a question on which standards we should be using, because the brouhaha between NSTA and CAPE came about in 2020, 2021 when the new standards came out for NSTA. So how do you want us to provide the data? Can we do 2 or 3 years of the 2012 standards, or can we do 2 years of the 2012 and 1 year of the 2020, or can we go with 2012 until we realize, oh, we have to change?
You need to be using 2020, period. For the state expects you to be using 2020 now. The beauty of state review versus NSTA review is the state actually, if you don't have completers, will still review your assessments to make sure that they align, even if you don't have data. So if you've only been able to implement an assessment 1 time instead of 2 using the 2020 standards, you can submit that to the state and just explain what happened. And if you haven't had completers in the last 3 years in a particular program like physics, it's always hard to have completers on a regular basis. You can actually submit that with no data.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, this is Catherine Madden. I actually do have a question, but it's probably more specific to our education program than this.
That's okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
We had a secondary biology program. It's been in abeyance for the past 3 years, and we didn't have any completers. So do we still need to complete a report, or what should we do?
Well, according to Jackie, I'm just going to quote what Jackie said to somebody who, it might have been you, but I'm not sure who it was, that asked that this morning. The state does not recognize dormant programs. So if you are, and as not having to submit something. So if you happen to have a program that you just haven't been offering, but you haven't told the state and had that withdrawn, the state is still going to expect a program review for that program. So there you'd have to think about, if you were in that kind of situation, what would the assessments be? What courses would we use? That kind of thing, and submit a program that has no data, a report that has no data, but it does have assessments.
Okay, I think that makes so.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and in the past, what I think was done is there was just a letter sent to the state that the program is now in abeyance, and so, but we do need to complete the.
What I'm gonna suggest to you, Catherine, is not today, but reach out to Jackie.
Okay.
And I would really get a good feel for what you would have to do to not have to submit a report, and then the institution can decide whether or not that's what they want to do, because that may hurt them down the road if they wanted to bring that program back.
Gotcha.
But because program review is now part of the state standards as well as part of CAPE, if they have you listed as a provider for program X, even if you're not currently offering program X, they're going to expect at least a set of assessments that are aligned with the standards and that would meet the expectations if you had completers.
Okay, that makes sense, Beth. Thank you so much.
No, that was a great question earlier today, and a great question now. I learned something actually. So
I think that William just backed that up in the chat, saying to show how you would collect data if you had completers.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay.
And then there's a question about reiterating from this morning, only need 2 years of data, expected or required. Again, there's some examples of if you only had 1 year, Beth used with William. I think the only place that they asked for 3 years was when you talk about your enrollment and completers from the program.
Yeah.
They have you look back at the past 3 years of your program, because that's where they want to know how many people were in your program. But then when you're actually doing the assessment data, it's just the past 2 years.
Correct. Or the past 2 cycles where you have data. So for example, in your chart, if you had nobody in, you had somebody in 21, 22, you didn't have anybody in 22, 23, but then you had somebody in 23, 24, it may be providing data from those 2 with a row in between. But again, the state is super flexible on data. So if you, and this is especially true for some of us in science, if you have a program that just has a completer once every 3 or 4 years, you could still just submit 1 cycle of data or actually no data at all. And the reviewers are expected to think if they had completers, we can't say whether they would do well or not, but if they had completers, would this rubric measure what they say that it would measure? Or do these courses represent a good program to meet all of these content specific things from the NSTA standards? Which can be a saving grace sometimes for small programs to not have to have 2 sets of data.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions that we might be able to address? Well, there is another session coming up soon. I don't know if any of you all are involved in any of those, but wish you the best of luck wherever you are in this process. And, you are welcome to reach out to Cassie and I if you need help with something. I'm sure we would both be willing to do our best. Have a great weekend.